Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code Spotify and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code Spotify on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance. Mindset on a new path. Anything is possible. Any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp. I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
Michael.
John.
How you doing today, sir?
Super. You know what I've been doing a lot of, John? And it's probably the fall trees and things that are going on. A lot of walks.
Have you been pumpkin patching?
No, I don't have the best experience with the pumpkin patch, but I like to go on an hour-long walk and get some nature air going on. I like to breathe in fresh air and see nature and just clear my head. And it's very therapeutic for me. My pumpkin patch story, when my son is younger, we went to a pumpkin patch for the first time, and I picked up some pumpkins that weighed a lot, and I didn't have any way to carry them. And my son was in a backpack on my back, and I got the pumpkins in my arms, and I'm walking all the way, like a half a mile of the car. And we're super proud of these amazing pumpkins that we picked. And when we got home, about a week later, they were all rotten. So I was like super bummed about that. And ever since, we've gotten our pumpkins from the grocery store.
Yep. I can sympathize or empathize with you, but I think that's enough pumpkin patching for the day.
Yeah, totally.
I thought you were going to say, I didn't know it was going to be walking, but you better get the walking in fast because it's changing. Seasons are changing here, and it's going to get cold.
For sure.
Enjoy it while you have it.
But we're back for the second act. We're back with an amazing guest today. You want to introduce our guest today, John?
I would love to, Michael. So today, man, I'm stoked to welcome Chris Hetzner, an entrepreneur who turned his side hustling into a thriving business, redefining what it means to live on your own terms. Chris's journey began with diverse paths, from playing lead guitar in a band to managing high-end restaurants in Los Angeles, where he honed his skills in operations and leadership. With an MBA in finance, Chris joined Ernst Young, consulting for giants like Ford, Uber, and United Healthcare, leading complex restructures. He then moved to Meta, tackling challenges with a senior leadership team, from optimizing customer service to managing billion-dollar budgets. Despite his corporate success, Chris sought more control over his future, free from the reorgs and politics of corporate life. In 2018, he took a leap by purchasing a short-term rental. What began as a side investment grew into Boost Rentals, managing 50 properties across the United States, including one of mine. So in April 2024, after years of planning, Chris left his corporate role to fully focus on his business. Now he inspires others to see time as the ultimate currency, urging them to align decisions with their passions. Let's explore how he navigated his highs and lows of business ownership and came to live life on his own terms. Man, welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me. That was a far better intro than I could have ever imagined. So I appreciate that.
John, we've had a couple people come on who've gone military to real estate in different forms. But I think, Chris, you're our first guest who went consulting tech real estate. So this is going to be interesting to hear about your journey.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, and a lot of strange things have lined up to bring me here. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and Michael, you're right. Now that you say that, I recognize that consistency that we have on the show, and in reading the intro, he left tech to go into real estate. And I'll tell you that as a client of Chris's, it shows in everything that he does. And like you, Michael, in the way that this show is run, to be very user friendly for our guests that come on. Chris makes that whole aspect very user friendly and very enjoyable. It's an enjoyable experience that we've been able to get out of it. So I'm excited to dive into it, but great job recognizing the uniqueness there.
Yeah. Should we kick it off with the first question that we like to start with, John, or do you want to throw a curveball out there? How do you want to get going?
I'm going to start with Chris in 30 seconds to a minute. Tell me the worst story you have from managing 50 properties across the U.S. because
you can't use
John's
property though.
Yeah, you can't use mine because I think it's interesting when I get onto LinkedIn or get onto social media platform. A lot of people are talking about, get into passive income, get into a short-term, ownership, get into this or that, and it makes it seem very easy and very limited on the bad experiences that you're going to have. But
For sure.
I know that you've been doing this for a couple of years now. What is one of the worst stories that you have?
I can tell you the worst. I'll just get right into it. It's very easy for me
Let's hear it.
Recollect this. So I had 2 properties in Nashville. I was also under contract for 5 more. And the purpose of those 5 more was actually to flip the contract and turn a profit because we got under contract a year before the build and we assumed they were going to increase in valuation. And we were on the finishing line of selling those properties. So just literally flipping the paperwork at a very large profit. And that was February 17th of 2020.
Remembers the day.
Yeah,
I know what's next.
Exactly. Yeah. We lost all 5 properties, which was going to be a life-changing event. Luckily, we got out of the contracts because there was a material change in the underlying permitting capabilities. So we luckily got out of that. But within 2 weeks, we dropped our prices to the floor just because we knew everybody was going to have to do that in COVID. We did that immediately because we were like, if anybody's going to be booked, it's going to be us. And we literally had a drug dealer that was selling crack take over our home and would not leave.
Oh.
So we spent, several days of recognizing the problem, also knowing we didn't have police support. There was a lot of need for law enforcement going on at the time, a lot of unrest that was happening as well, and finally got my way out of it after they'd just literally been kind of turning and burning on our front door doing drug deals, which was terrifying to watch. Destroyed a brand new home. They were like the 3rd or 4th guest. And luckily got out of that situation because I tracked down the parents of the person that walked in the home and actually rented our home, and had to contract the sheriff in their small town in Ohio where she came from to let her know that I was going to send video of her and her friends and family dealing drugs at my house if they did not leave the premise. So we went from this huge high of thinking we made this amazing real estate deal to the deal falling through to all of our properties being in limbo and so much of our livelihood wrapped up in that, to having drug dealers take over our home and not release it back to us all within a few weeks. So
wow,
it doesn't, I hope it doesn't get worse than that, but it also just told me something about life, which is you're going to figure something else out. You're always going to figure it out, right? Everything's temporary. So we figured it out. And a couple of years later, my entire livelihood is based on short-term renting and real estate. So was that bad enough?
That's good.
That's pretty bad. And I if I recall, at that time they also suspended eviction laws, right? Like you couldn't evict anyone out. So not only do you have people doing things they shouldn't in the property, but you can't legally get rid of them because stuff has been suspended because of COVID. So it's just a disastrous sort of circumstances. That's crazy.
Yeah, which is why I was like, okay, I know I'm not going to have any help. How do I force this person out of my home and think in a different way? Because we kept turning on the alarm just to drive them nuts.
Yeah.
And they kept turning it off. And then they still weren't leaving. I was like, all right, I'm going to track down this person's family and let her family know. And that is what, all of a sudden I said, here's your dad and mother's name. They live at this address. The sheriff of this county is on their way now. So you can either get out of the home now or they're going to go knock on your front door with all these videos. So what would you like to do? And they just, fled the home with all of our stuff, unfortunately, but finally got out.
So you shamed them
Well,
out of the property.
Exactly.
It's not bad.
Had to get
not a bad
creative.
strategy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. For those of you who think that passive means you can go completely
Not
hands off,
completely
No.
passive. Yeah.
there's at least one story for you to reconsider and think through what you're about to get into.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I want to, as I was reading through your bio, there's a lot of journey in between a couple sentences, and so I want to go back and let's talk about how you got into a band and then going to restaurants and then going into operations and leadership. So let's start with our viewers. Just give us a little background of who you are before we get too far down the road.
Yeah, I think kind of starting from when I was younger, I was really heavy into sports initially and ended up not realizing the work that it took to keep up with everyone else in the competition as I got older. Like it hadn't occurred to me like the work ethic required. And then all of a sudden I wasn't so great at that. And I needed something else to dive into. And I picked up music and I would spend hours and hours and hours playing by myself, playing with my friends every single day. And later I realized that it was just that time and effort that went into that made me, one, pretty good at it, and two, like really enjoy it. And, throughout life,
Yeah.
I took that. I went and worked at MTV for a little bit. It wasn't on my bio
Yeah,
just
nice.
because I thought music was my path
Yep.
for a little while. But what I found in life that led me to going and operating restaurants, led me to working in consulting, later at Meta, and then running my own business is that I kind of view myself as like a chameleon. I don't need to dive into something and learn 99.999% of what's out there about playing guitar. I like to get varied experience in life. I learned guitar. I was pretty good at it. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't Jimi Hendrix, which is ultimately why I was like, okay, I'm not going to spend my whole life if I'm not Jimi Hendrix. Maybe I could have spent my whole life trying to be that, and it could have been, worked out. But I have just always enjoyed varied experiences. So when I got done
I
with
love
that
that.
path, it was like, okay, what's the next thing I've always wanted to do? And I've always found restaurants interesting. So I quit my job and said, how do I work for the best restaurant group in LA? And went in and did the best interview of my life, for sure, to date, even though I've had, I guess, more interesting jobs, probably harder to get jobs. But I just went in and said, I'm going to work harder than every single person in this restaurant.
Nice.
And they were really incredulous of that. And several people interviewed me. And I remember they were trying to figure out if they were going to bring me on as a manager. And I remember the VP of that business and him and I like kind of hit it off in our interview. He's like, tell me the hardest thing you've ever done. And I told him how I was actually the president of my fraternity and my fraternity hazed. And there were also lots of people abusing drugs in my fraternity, and how I had to stand up to 80 alcohol-fueled, testosterone-fueled men when I was 20 years old and tell them we weren't going to follow that path anymore. It was a kind of like formative moment where I decided I had a spine and I believed in what was right. And I took a stand, and there were lots of issues that led up to that. And it was that kind of moment that really led me into many of these other things. I just had belief in learning something new and was willing to take a chance to go learn something entirely new and invest my time and effort into it. And eventually that led me to consulting and working in tech and trying out varied opportunities, and now opening my own business, which is definitely not going to be the only business I ever own. That was step towards owning whatever business I want to in the future. And it was a really kind of smooth transition from what I was doing before, I guess.
Chris, we have very similar belief systems, at least with what you've shared so far about preferring a varied experience over like super deep domain expertise in one thing. But you also said earlier in the conversation that everything in life is temporary. And that's something I don't hear people acknowledge often publicly. So where does that thought process come from? And I can understand how it sort of led you through your journey so far, but I would love to just get to understand a little bit about that mindset.
Man, that's a great question. So I guess I've been thinking about that more and more as I've gotten older. I'm 37. And if I look at just over the last several years, if I look at my nuclear family and my extended family, everything that I thought my family was when I was 15 is totally different today. People have passed away, people have come and gone, divorces has happened, all this stuff. And like, I remember when I was young, I was just so sure in that structure, right?
Yep.
And then ultimately, just I think from a career perspective, the more you spend your time in other people's businesses and the more that you make decisions and people come and go, you realize that the decision you made yesterday resonated one way with the group that was there, and that same decision 2 weeks later with the new group is received in a completely different fashion. So you always have to be nimble and moving. And as I've been thinking about this, it's culminated in kind of, I guess, my second act, which is where we originally kind of started talking, right? Which is the more I've believed in the fact that everything is temporary, the more I've been open to and available to take different risks. For example, leaving my job and starting my own business. A lot of people are so terrified of leaving their job, which I was scared too. But at the end of the day, it's like, if you did a good job while you were there and you leave for a year and your whole world caves in and you know that it can only cave in so bad that a year later you could go back to that job and recover, then you're really not taking a risk,
Right. I think life is more fun when you live it as an experiment and sort of test out hypotheses as to what you think is going to work for you or what's not going to work for you, and try different things. And yeah, I think experience over time in certain areas gives you confidence to be able to deliver on whatever it is you're working on. And just that confidence that sort of inside it, you apply that knowing that things could not work out or fail at some point, and just be okay with that.
100%. Yeah. And just know that you've dealt with 50 problems, 1,000 problems, a million problems in your last however many years of life. And somehow you're here today and, able to be productive in whatever form you choose to be so. And you got through all those things. So why wouldn't you be able to get through the next one?
Exactly. Awesome.
Chris, in 2018, when you switched from Meta over to starting Boost Rentals, was that kind of a burn the ships moment for you where you said, I'm going this direction. I'm not looking back. I'm not relying on this corporate life that I've lived or this, experience in finance. And I'm moving forward and this is the direction I'm going to go. And if it doesn't work, I'll figure it out from there, but I'm all in. Is that a fair assessment of how you got into Boost?
So actually it's a little different. And I actually think it'll hopefully be an even better story because I think this resonates more with most people than like burning the ship because people are afraid of risk, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty risk averse. It may be hard to see from outside looking in, but just I take so much from my father, and he's the most risk averse man I've ever met. And so I had to learn how to be risky. And so I bought a home. I literally have purposely been teaching myself to be more risky. I really have. It's been a process. So I bought my first home, which was a huge risk, or my first investment property in my perspective then. And that day, and I spent a year deciding where I was going to invest the first sum of money I really had in my bank account, right? And I decided on my objective before I decided on my investment. And my objective was put my money in a place that has substantive cash flow, that if I grew whatever business that was, it could one day replace my day job. And it also had to be a business that I could run while doing my day job. So that was my criteria. And so I researched franchises and all kinds of different businesses. And I found Airbnb and short-term renting, had the cash available to do it, had the organizational and kind of operational means to do that efficiently while hiding it from my day job. And so what happened, there's kind of one other more pivotal point. So we bought a few of those homes. And then one day I got tired of managing those homes. And I actually hired Vacasa, which is a mammoth short-term rental property management company. My revenue dropped by nearly 60% in the first 3 months. I saw how horribly they were running that company, and just a light bulb went
Interesting.
on. I said, if this is my competition, then the business I've always wanted to open, this is not, this is not a sexy business at all. But the biggest player in the world is doing this poorly. I'm going to go after their business. And I did that incrementally over time while I was at Meta for about 2.5, 3 years. And I found myself, 3 years later, so frustrated with my day job that I got off a call with one of my managers where the politics and perception was so much more important than actually doing the work. And I was so frustrated. And this is like my 10th manager in like 2.5 years, by the way, because it was just chaos there.
Yeah.
I was so upset, and I had this moment where I was like, I had an objective 5 years ago, which was to build a business that could replace my day job. And I'd grown my property management business slowly, and ultimately, for all my fixed expenses and basically to meet my, lifestyle, I was making enough money in my side business to where I didn't need my day job anymore. I said, the only thing keeping me from that is me being scared. So that day, which was like October of 2023, was the day I decided I was going to quit Meta. I gave myself like a 4-week break. I stacked up all my vacation, was like, you're going to take this time off. Obviously, it pissed off my managers. You're going to take this time off and just really make sure you're making the right decision. And so I stepped away and said, am I being stupid? Am I being vain? What are all the reasons I should second guess myself, and really thoroughly evaluate those? And I walked out on the other end saying, no, I feel that my perception of the situation is justified, and I need to go take this step. So it was actually a long, slow burn, John, to answer your question. Though I think a lot of people might have seen it as dramatic from the perspective of my coworkers, because they hadn't realized I'd been on that journey. Sure. And now I view it as, okay, I made that jump, and now I can make many more jumps however I like in the future. So I learned so much from that.
Chris, your story reminds me of two things. One, of a Warren Buffett quote that says, never test the depths of the water with both feet, which I think, like you, I take calculated risks. John knows I do some planning on the back end, comes to how I think through risk and experimentation and trying new things. But once I make the decision, I just go. There's no looking back. I'm not a backward looking person in any way. It's either now or trying to think about the future a little bit. But John, you touched on something at the beginning about the customer experience, and then Chris, you mentioned it in your story. And it's funny that two tech guys are sort of obsessed about customer experience, because in the technology world, in many cases, the switching costs are really low. And when you have a really bad product experience, you tend to look for alternatives, as long as it's not too disruptive, and you want to like the customer as much as possible. So Chris, it's cool that you capitalized on that opportunity, but a lot of people think they need this huge epiphany to jump in and do something, and it's really oftentimes just some incremental change that people notice that gives you this opportunity to move forward. And your focus on cash flow versus like trying to win the lottery with picking the right stock or getting this huge cap gain somewhere is also interesting, because the freedom calculator is very simple. It's income exceeds expenses. That's it. So I love your story.
It's really just kind of interesting hearing you say that too, is like, I think so many people think that quitting their job is just this moment where you're going to have nothing and then you're going to make something. And I just didn't view it that way. I prepared meticulously to quit my job. And I think, I was listening to some stories the other day talking about, can't remember the really super hot pizza oven that everybody has in their backyard now. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like an uni pizza oven. Those guys worked their day job for 5 years while they were building that. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And the reality was, 2 years in, it might have been a $20 million company. Or 3 years in, it might have been a $100 million company. And they still chose to continue down the path that they were at, because they were weighing some measurement of risk and reward through maintaining their day jobs and stability of their family or whatever it was. But it didn't go from quit your job and bam, you have a multi-billion-dollar company. Right. It was a build just like anything else.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouthwatering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
I'm going to jump in here real quick and just tell you, Chris, that I appreciate that correction, right, between burn the ships and going into it easy, because I think a lot of people that we've talked to hear of these evolutions of people going from a corporate life into entrepreneurship, or, one set, lifestyle into something completely different.
Yeah.
And it feels like sometimes a burn the ships moment where it all has to climax at the right time for this to be successful. And I think that we glance over the process and the slow burn that it can be to get your footing, to do one thing after another, to kind of get started and let it build upon itself before success is realized. And so I appreciate you correcting me in that and proving to people that there is an alternative to jumping in headfirst into something else and this radical change into a new life. It can be gradual and you can be successful in that process.
For sure. I mentioned this briefly in terms of like training myself to take risks, but if I ever was a mentor to any of my friends, maybe they'd use that word in some sense when it comes to business. I don't know if they do or not, but I at least put out my perspective when they talk to me about opening a new business. They have so many fears around it because there's so many risks involved. I always tell them, like, go take a risk. Don't look at it like you need to take some massive risk of quitting your job to start a business. Train yourself to take the risk. And that's why I gave myself a year to make my first big investment, which it was very big and meaningful to my financial setup, right? It was probably very small when you talk to many other people in real estate and all this stuff, right? But I had to start small and teach myself to accept a risk. And then when I look back 3 or 4 years ago, I realized there was really no risk involved. I could either short-term rent my house and make great cash flows, or I could have long-term rented it. There was no risk. And so like teaching yourself to do that is like my number one piece of advice. And it takes some people longer than others, but I do believe you can train yourself to accept risk and reap the rewards of doing so once you've trained yourself.
Yeah. And this obsession with speed, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, like why there's this obsession with having to do so much so fast. And the only logical explanation I can come up with is it has to do with incentives and who's involved in the process for sort of pursuing something. So if you're a bootstrapped startup of any kind, it could be a low-tech or a high-tech business, and bootstrapping just means that you're funding it yourself. You can go at your own pace, a measured pace. You can go as fast or as slow as you want. No one's sort of looking over your shoulder. You're adding people to the business, either contractually or as employees, in the ways that you think make the most sense. And you're not having to deploy capital in a way that someone is like, I gave you the money, go spend it.
Yep.
Whereas if you have venture capitalists or private equity people, and then more of those sort of behind them, the incentive is to spend the money as fast as possible, to grow as fast as possible. So you raise the value of their investment because they want the value of their investment to go up so they can report it back to their investor base. So if you understand the incentives, you start to understand how the system works. So just be very careful about which system you want to participate in.
For sure. It's great perspective. And as a great use case, if you ever look into the Vacasa purchase of turnkey vacation rentals, that is exactly what happened. They were told to expand. They purchased all these businesses. Their stock price has been down, I think, 99% over 5 years ago, because that's exactly what
Ouch.
happened. And I see that happening all the time. You're 100% right. Yeah, because you can press the gas
Yeah.
when you want and take vacation when you want, as long as you understand the structure of your business is in place to maintain its current trajectory, and if that's acceptable to you, it's a freeing thing.
Absolutely.
I think that there's a little bit, Michael and Chris, of a societal expectation as well that everything is going to happen fast,
Yeah.
right? We have so much data at the tips of our fingertips. We have so many things that are readily accessible to us very quickly, and it's changing the mindset for people. I think even in business, where you want quick results, you want to see immediate return, and I'm guilty of that, and Chris can testify. We got into a rental a year and a half ago, and 3 months later, we're saying, where are all of our guests?
Yeah.
Why are they not staying? Why are they not leaving reviews? And Chris explained, well, it's gotta be a slow burn. It's gotta be a slow introduction into the
Yeah.
market. And then once you get those reviews and get those, accolades, people will start flooding in, and that's the case
Yeah.
now. But it took a good year to establish ourselves in the market that we're in. But I'm guilty of thinking, well, I bought a house, I turned it over to Airbnb. Where are my guests? Why are they not coming? And I think Chris's user experience helps in our expectation management. But I do think that we have so many things that are happening so fast that we expect in all the paradigms in which we live, that to be the result in those other
For sure.
aspects. And maybe I'm off, but I think that's part of it as well.
Absolutely.
I don't think you're off, John. I think you're more of the norm with how people think and what information they're fed on a regular basis in terms of how they
Right.
should think. And a lot of times, probably in the case of Acasa, which is you're reaping the rewards of, Chris, you sacrifice quality for speed.
And I also think people, they've chased a number without remembering what their objective was. Maybe your objective with your home, John, was to build, long-term equity. Like, just use that as an example, right? And it's possible. I have no idea how your conversations went, right? But I think, if that was your initial goal, and if you'd gotten a chance to talk to a wide variety of people with that objective in line, maybe you would have been more open to saying it's okay if it's a slow burn, if that was your initial goal, right? If your initial goal was to turn
Yeah.
and burn immediately, that's a whole different story. But kind of, it always depends where you originated the idea and what you fully want to get out of that in the long run that can change your path to get there in many ways. I test my friends on that all the time. They'll say, "Oh, well, I want to get this promotion." I say, "For what?" And they're like, "Well, I want to make more money." Well, for what?
Yeah.
And then they don't even know what to tell me, what they do with their money. They're like, "Well, I travel more." I was like, "Well, you don't have vacation time with this job, so you couldn't. It doesn't matter how much money you're making if you don't leave the
100%.
job or change the way you operate within it. You're not actually changing
Yeah.
your life. Period."
Yeah.
Well, now that we've kind of broken the seal on Boost and what
Yeah.
you're kind of doing, tell us more about it, or explain to our listeners what you're doing in this space and how you're kind of different
Yeah.
from everyone else, and then how you're growing and some exciting things in the future of Boost.
So what we do at Boost, like many jobs or businesses I've worked for in the past that I've seen that are successful, my belief is that simplicity is the key. So we run a very, very simple, lean team. We have simple processes that are repeatable over and over and over at a high quality. And we also simply manage homes. We only do Airbnb. In very select scenarios, we're willing to consider Verbo. However, that has not been a good strategy for anyone yet that I've worked with. And so I have a support team in place that is goaled with two objectives, which is They are incentivized to provide a great guest experience, and I've built all the infrastructure and operations for them to do so, and 40% of their pay comes from the quality of reviews.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the other 60% of their pay comes from the relationships we build with our owners and the service we provide to them. So I have certain criteria that if we are not managing owners in X way, if we don't get the invoices out on time, if we don't have the right amount of detail and information for the maintenance that took place, or we didn't respond to maintenance in the right amount of time, then they get docked that way, which may sound cutthroat, but they love it. They know exactly what their role is. So we manage homes on Airbnb. I think we have great service for both the guests themselves and the owners. But ultimately, there are two things that really make that work. One, I've built a really extensive and exhaustive, basically library of every single type of job that we do. So I have virtual assistants in the Philippines.
Okay.
When I hire a new one, they actually have a 3-week onboarding program that are all recorded videos of every system that we use, every process, passwords, everything to log into all of my work systems that they teach themselves. They have a few hours with me throughout that time period, and then they have a mentor. So I can literally hire a new employee. And so by doing that, I have a strong operational process always, which I'm always tweaking.
Yep.
But the other thing is just building expertise and pricing. This really goes back to my experience at Meta. When you're working at Meta in such a large-scaled environment, there's a lot of people doing operational work, but you don't know how to theorize, understand, and change your strategy without looking at aggregated data. It'll be customer service scores and turnaround times and all this stuff, and you have to look at all this aggregated data, and we can do that. I've taken that same data analysis skill that I learned there to determine the trajectory of a customer service and operations business at Meta, and I've dug into the data pricing that way. So ultimately, my goal in pricing is not to listen to a bunch of people on the internet tell me what to do with pricing, which is what so many people do.
Sure.
I go in and I look at the real-time data through a couple different sources, one of which is Price Labs, that tells me the average booking time for, a 3-bedroom home during the October period, which is 62 days.
Okay.
And I plan and strategize all my pricing about that. So I've got 12 3-bedroom homes, or actually a lot more than that, but a bunch of 3-bedroom homes that I go in and I look at the data every single week, and I say in October, the average lead time was 62 days. I'll use January. Average lead time is 22 days. February, average lead time is 34 days. And so what I do is I actually price above what I expect, probably 10, 15 days before then, and I test the market iteratively going down until I get a booking. And that tells me that's pretty close to my optimal price.
Very cool.
So I use that, and that has proven out that we drive 20% higher revenue at least than all the property managers of everyone that I've taken on as an owner, for sure, with 100% certainty. And in most scenarios, at least 20% higher than the market average for comparable properties. I have a few properties that are an exception, but it's that value proposition. And the last thing was just growth. Mike, you mentioned this earlier about you can kind of pace yourself out in growing a business. My goal, just to meet some of my objectives in life, is to get to 150 properties. That's based on average profit per property by the end of next year.
Okay.
I would say our growth is, there are a lot of outcomes that I could reasonably expect by the end of next year. One is 150, one is 90, one is 141, and everything in between, right? But what I'm trying to refine right now is how I'm getting there. I have a pretty good strategy for cold calling, which is where I started. I've gotten more advanced in email campaigns. I've gotten more advanced in social media advertising for call booking funnels, though I'm not really getting the ROI that I'd want. The highest ROI is by far cold calling.
Referrals too?
Referrals. Oh yeah, great point. Referrals and then cold calling for sure. The lowest ROI in terms of me is cold calling at the same time, right? In terms of my time required, but from a dollars and cents perspective, it makes sense. So I'm really going through like a maturity cycle where I'm evaluating a lot of different options pretty thoroughly. They're all working in tandem, but my goal is to get to 150 properties. One, I think it's a really great size for a business. I can see the path for my operations team to get there. And two, it puts me in a position where I'm able to actually, I think, start providing much more extensive services for the owners that I have. If they so
Interesting.
choose, getting better and more detailed and dealing with Verbo. If they're more interested, there's a lot of different kind of like AI plugins that are coming into play outside of like traditional property management software that I really want to start experimenting with to see if there's a way that I can actually replace some of my customer service team in the human interaction, but not replace them from actually doing the follow through and the maintenance and management and all the kind of the cleaning and everything from like a boots on ground perspective. So I'm trying to get further away from guest interaction without them feeling it and focus solely on the ground operations, which I think is how this business will be successful in the long run in competing with many other players that are out there.
It's really fascinating. Like, I'm fascinated with your whole story, but especially what you've done with Boost Rentals, Chris. Because we touched on incentives. You've incentivized your folks in the right way to provide a great guest experience and make the owners who use your service happy.
Yeah.
And they want to keep coming back, but you've also applied your operational excellence expertise to all the dimensions of the business so far, which is awesome. And it's really great that you understood, I think early in the process, that the onboarding is so important, because I imagine in that role, it may not be a high income role, so there might be higher turnover. So you want to
Yep.
make sure that everything's sort of buttoned up so that when people come and go, it's fairly seamless. So it's just really
For
cool the
sure.
way that you've thought about this.
Well, something that was pleasantly surprised by that as well is something that I was always a critic of so many businesses that I worked within, which is I define this whole onboarding process. And what I quickly have realized is that the people that have gotten through it love it so much because they know every expectation I could ever have at any moment. Which in my past business, I would be a critic saying, I don't want to stay up on Friday because stay up super late on Friday night because you didn't set your team up for success. That would be my number one critique of my managers. I had great
Yeah.
ones and then I had really bad ones. The great ones, we never did that. And so their job is to set us up for success. And what I found is, you mentioned, pay. They're competitively paid, but there's a lot of people that competitively pay actually in that market that we operate in. They love working for my business because they know what they can expect of their job every single day. And they know the type of person that I am and how I'm going to react, because my reaction is always the same. Did you follow the playbook? And I never have to have that conversation because it's easier for them to follow the playbook than it is for us to have a discussion about it. So they really enjoy their jobs every
It's
day.
awesome.
And that's the place that I would want to work too,
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Chris, I love, when we did the introduction, we talked about entrepreneurship, but then you hit on something just a minute ago about a team. And I think that's so integral that good entrepreneurs lean on the team that they build around them. And you've obviously done
For
this,
sure.
and to be able to scale from a 50 to 150 properties in a year takes on a tremendous amount of effort, yet you seem unfazed by it because I
Yeah.
believe you've built a team around you that you trust. They trust you. You just talked about the expectation management and following a playbook. Those are the most important steps in growing the business and having people around you, but yet here you are doing it. And so I applaud that approach that, you don't set out as an entrepreneur and say, damn it all, I'm going to do this on my own and nobody's going to help me. But you say, all right, who do I have around me that's going to help me with my strengths and weaknesses, fill in the
Yep.
gaps, and help me grow. But then also take on this same vision that you have for that growth. So that's pretty amazing because we don't hear that a lot, in people that are starting out on their entrepreneurial journey.
And one thing that I can remember very clearly is, and as you kind of got kicked off for a second, John, I was telling Mike about how I've just built this very exhaustive, basically library of information, right? And my fiance could tell you that she saw me like with crazy Albert Einstein hair, probably smelling disgusting, like attempting to shower when I could finally pull myself away from the computer. But the reality is, it took me like 4 or 5 days of exhaustive effort, and it literally changed my life. Because how often does a manager or an owner spend 4 or 5 days 100% invested in making sure that their employees can operate? And like a light switch, everything changed. I can focus on sales 100%, which was my goal of doing that. I said, I need to focus on sales 100%. So how do I do that? And that was the answer. And every business I'm ever in, I will take those 4 or 5 days once I've hit a certain maturity and I know enough about the business to say, this is how it's going to operate. And this is how everyone can be successful and put the time in. So changed my life. The reason I have time to talk to you guys, the reason I have time for my personal life, all of those things. So
that's the difference between working in the business and working on the business. And a lot of people work in the business to make enough money to survive, but they never take a step back to work on the business to figure out that growth. And that's exactly what you just explained.
Absolutely. Interesting.
Well, Chris, we as we start to round things out here, we always like to ask our guests one very important question, and that's what practical advice or insights for those who are contemplating or just starting out their second act, whatever it is, what would you like to leave them with?
I'm going to leave you with some advice of someone I talked to the other day going into the short-term rental business. Make the first phone call. Don't worry about all the ways you need to plan for all the problems that can occur with cleaning and maintenance and all those things. There's a million resources. Just make the first phone call, and it's going to go terribly. It's going to go terribly. I still have phone calls go terribly. But make the first phone call, because not until you learn to sell does your business start to grow. And that's harder to figure out than all the operations that you could possibly imagine. So
awesome.
Hopefully that's
I love that.
a good one.
That is perfect.
That's
yes, good. Absolutely perfect.
Well, Chris, I'm so fascinated about your journey from where you got started to where you are now, and how you encapsulated growth along every step of the way, and how you were able to self-reflect and evaluate not only where you were at, but the journey you were on, and to make sure that it was fulfilling and where you wanted it to take you. So I really do appreciate I appreciate your work ethic, especially in managing one of our properties, but also for just taking the time to sit down with us and give some advice to our listeners on their entrepreneurial journey or their second act, and give a little insight too into the real estate community. So thank you for your time. And man, for listeners who are interested in learning more about you and your business, where is the best place for them to find you?
Yeah. So a couple places: my website, boost-rentals.com, or on Instagram, boost.rentals. Those are the best two spots for sure. And all my contact information's on there, phone numbers, emails, everything from that perspective. So
awesome. This was so much fun. I love this conversation today.
Thank you guys so much. This was fun.
It was a good break from some of the other conversations we've had. And Michael, I just appreciate you and what you and Chris have a passion for is that user experience and making it better for those around you. And man, I appreciate both of you so much. So thanks again for being on the show, Chris and Michael. Yeah. Man, I look forward to another episode. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Likewise, John. Until next time.
Yeah. See ya.
See ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballinger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings
podcasts.